We're almost halfway through the 4th season of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Our oldest and most faithful sponsor, SJ&L General Contractors, has entered a new phase of their business. They've actually sold out and will be owned by another company. I'm not sure that I'm allowed to discuss the details of that, but it's a very interesting move. These guys are going to be able to enjoy the fruitions of the labor and the reputation and the hard work they've done in their area. But because of that change, they will no longer be sponsoring Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. I want to thank them for the loyal support and helping get this podcast off the ground, and wish them the very, very best of success in their new endeavors, whether it's working for the new parent company or whether it's enjoying some well-earned retirement and the fruits of their labor. SJ&L General Contractors, the folks in that family-owned business, are dear friends of mine, and I wish them the best from Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. TKM Incorporated in Moss, Tennessee is a construction company that specializes in erosion control, seeding, and soil, hydroseeding, hydromulch, minor excavation, and silt fence. They also provide traffic control and construction signs. Their business is keeping people safe, but their passion, their mission, is they wish that all men could be saved. TKM has adopted the nickname the King's Men because as they serve you, they also serve the King. If they could provide any of their services for you, please contact them at 931-243-3958. That is 931-243-3958. Or you can contact them on the net at tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. That is tkminc2001 at twlakes.net. TKM Incorporated is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. The conclusion that I came to was that he was important. Now, at my age and my station in life, important was probably a relative term. It's sort of like, the story of the Pope being driven through Alcorn County, Mississippi, and they're on these back roads in Mississippi, and the Pope knocks on the divider between the driver and the passenger compartment. The young man pulls over, lowers the window, and the Pope says, "Do you know how long it's been since I've been allowed to drive my own car?" And the young man said, "Well, no, sir, I don't." And he said, "Well, I would really like to take advantage of us being out here in the middle of nowhere, and I'd like to drive." Well, as a young acolyte, you don't argue with the Pope. So he gets out, let the Pope in the driver's seat, and he gets in the passenger compartment and rolls up the tinted windows, and he's enjoying a nice little leisurely ride. And the Pope was enjoying his new freedom and probably got a little heavy-footed. Well, if you've ever driven much through any place in Mississippi, there's always a deputy or a constable somewhere waiting to pull you over. And sure enough, he gets blue lighted. The deputy walks up and taps on the window, and the Pope rolls down the window, and the deputy stares in amazement at the Pope and says, "Just a minute, I'll be right back." He goes back to the cruiser and he calls into the station and says, "Chief, I'm going to need some guidance here." And the chief said, "What's the problem?" He goes, "Well, I've pulled over a dignitary and I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to write him, give him a warning, or just absolutely let him go." And the chief said, "Well, I need a little help here. How important is this guy?" He goes, "Well, he's pretty important." "Well, how important is he?" Well, he's very important." "How important? Are we talking like a city councilman?" He goes, No. We're above the food chain on that." He said, "Are we talking about the mayor?" He goes, "No, we're not talking about the mayor." He goes, "Well, you're talking about like, somebody who's like the governor or somebody from the state capitol." He goes, "No, sir, we're not talking about state level." He goes, "Well, then we're talking about Washington. Are we talking about a congressman? Are we talking about a representative? We were not talking about the vice president or the president. Somebody would have told us they were coming through." He goes, "No, sir, you don't understand. I don't really know how important this guy is, but he's real important." "Well, what makes you say that if he's not city, state, or from the State Department? How do you know that he's super important?" "Well, I don't know who he is, but his driver is the Pope." Well, he wasn't that important, but I knew he might be important. You see, I was on my way southbound from Cloverdale, Indiana, and I was on I-65. I was driving my 1968 Chevrolet Impala named West Wind, and I passed a really, really nice car. And less than 2 miles past the really, really nice car that had the hood up, I saw a guy walking in a really, really nice business suit. I put two and two together. Guy in the suit belongs to the car belongs to the guy in the suit. I probably need to check and see if he's okay. Now, you got to understand that as a younger person and even as an adult, if my wife or my children are in the car, I have picked up hitchhikers, and most of the hitchhikers that I picked up were indigent. You could tell they were homeless. They were traveling. They were out of doors. They were on foot. One exception to that was I picked up this gentleman in an austere black suit. I was in southern Tennessee going to speak at some little thing, and this gentleman was walking down the road, and he was in a black suit, tall, angular, thin man, almost like an undertaker. I picked him up, and we drove a little ways together, and we talked and we chatted, and we finally got in these little rural towns in Tennessee, and he said, this is where I'm going. I pulled over to let him out. He gets out of the car and walks away, turns and comes back to the car, leans inside the window and locks eyes with me and says, and just because they're green doesn't mean you go through them. And he walked away. Within 15 miles, I'm in one of these little towns that's built, just on an X in the road. And I come to a four-way intersection with a red light in the middle. And as I'm approaching the red light, it changes from red to green. And for whatever reason, I pump the brakes and don't go through it. And as I slowed my car, slow enough not to enter the intersection, a log truck doing about 70 miles an hour blows through this intersection. And it was the words of the old man, the words of my passenger, who looked at me and said, just because they're green, don't go through them. I'd heard those words in my head, and I tapped the brakes on my car, and I did not enter that intersection. And had I entered that intersection, we would not be having this conversation today. And I don't know what's up with that. I won't even begin to try to explain it. I don't know if you call this whole fella an angel. I don't even know if angels work that way. Whatever happened, one of the weirdest things ever happened in my life happened because of that. On another occasion, I was going north on I-65, going to speak in Columbia, Tennessee. It was drizzling rain and spitting snow. And I saw a guy on the side of the road on a motorcycle. I pulled over because he was in miserable shape. He was wearing a gray hoodie, and I pulled over and asked him what was going on. And he was traveling from Louisiana somewhere up north because his wife had just had a baby. He was trying to get home in time to see this newborn, and his bike had run out of gas. Well, we went down the road, and I bought a gas can. We filled it up, brought it back, topped his bike off. And I said, now, look, you can't travel as far as you're traveling in this weather with this gray cotton hoodie that you've got on. You're going to freeze to death. And I keep a military jacket behind the seat of my truck, an old black field jacket that I use for call outs and running around the woods with SWAT. And I said, just take my jacket. He goes, well, I'm not going to take your jacket without giving you some security. And he took his sweatshirt off and gave it to me. And I wrote my name and address and put it in the inside pocket of the jacket. And within several weeks, I got my jacket back and a picture of him holding the baby. And I promptly put his sweatshirt back in a box and sent it to him. On another occasion, I was coming over Chaplain Mountain. It was pouring down rain. And this disheveled, young-looking fellow was walking down the road with two duffel bags in his hand. I pulled over, asked him to hop in, get out of the rain. We started down the road, and he had met someone on the internet and was going to Chattanooga to meet them. And, this was 15 years ago when you didn't meet people on the internet and you didn't get in a car with strangers. And now you call someone that you found on social media, and they come to your house and you get in the car with them and they take you anywhere. It's called Uber, which the world has turned upside down. But we're driving down the road, and I'm hearing that he's going to go meet this new love of his life. And then he just gets really weird. And he looks at me and he says, do you ever worry about picking up someone that might do you harm, like a murderer or a serial killer? And I tried to maintain my composure, but you have this kind of feeling in your chest that, oh boy, I may have made a mistake this time. I said, the only problem with picking up people who try to do me harm is replacing the window and getting the brains off the ceiling. He said, I'll stop right here. And so I pulled over and let him back out into the rain. Life's about choices. Anyway, this is not the only guy I've ever picked up, but this guy's in a suit. He was a very nice suit. And in fact, because I was driving a 68 Chevrolet Impala named Westwind, his suit probably cost more than my car. I pulled over and asked where he was headed. He said he was headed to Louisville, Kentucky. Well, I said, look, I'm going to be on I-65. I'm going to be on I-65 till I get to Alabama. And so you're welcome to ride with me, and I'll be glad to take you to the doorstep. And so we ride along. He finds out I'm a minister, and I find out he's a business executive. He tells me where to go, where to turn here, turn there. We pull up to this big building, and blazoned across the front entrance of the building is Anheuser-Busch. And he's an executive vice president, a CEO or a CFO or one of those alphabet guys with this big company. He hands me his business card, and he says, if this preaching thing ever doesn't work out for you, you've always got a job here. Now, I guess the reason he gave me a job offer was at the moment in time, he was important and he was wealthy and he was powerful. But at this moment in time, he didn't have a car that worked, and I did. And so he got in the car and felt somehow indebted to me. And the only thing he could do for me was offer me a job. I was young. I was poor. I was unimportant, a nobody. But my $250 1968 Chevrolet Impala was working, and he needed a car. And at that time, he didn't care what kind of car. At that time in his life, he didn't care what I was wearing, and he didn't care how good the car was or how bad the car was. He was just willing to ride in my car. He needed a ride and was willing to use mine. He didn't ask to drive. He just got in, and I drove him to his office building. He used to send me a Christmas card every year. And every year in that Christmas card was that renewed offer. Hey, if you ever need a job, if that preaching thing doesn't work out for you, you've got a job here. Well, I guess he'd evaluated me at the same time. Although my car wasn't impressive and although my car wasn't important, he chose to ride in it because he needed to. At the same time, he probably looked at the way I was dressed and probably looked at the value of my car and realized this kid's probably not a very successful preacher. This kid's probably not going to make it long in his chosen field if this is what they pay him and this is what he drives. I was a young student minister at the time, and although my life has changed somewhat, I still consider myself a minister. Now, I've been in private practice as a therapist and as a consultant. This New Year's Day will start my 26th year of being completely self-employed and doing my own thing. But I still consider myself as a minister. Now, you got to understand, if by minister you picture the guy up front out loud wearing a tie with a title, that's not it. If by minister you mean a person who tries to serve others, then yeah, that's what I try to be. That's what I consider to be my vocation. I minister through counseling. I minister through adventure programs. I minister through being a chaplain. I minister maybe even through this podcast, but I try to provide things for people that they don't have. Now, as a minister, as the guy employed by the church, when I worked full-time for churches, I've had some tough moments in ministry. I unprepared for the tragedy that you deal with it as a minister. The breakups that you would see and the diagnosis you would hear, the funerals you would perform, and then just the business side of ministry, because ministry in some cases, being a preacher is a job, and you work for people. Sometimes you work with people. A lot of us as ministers have found out the difference between working with people and working for people. I can remember one of my very first jobs, the first job I had where I was the pulpit preacher. I think in the other groups they may call that the lead pastor or the executive pastor. This is I was a pulpit preacher. I was the guy who spoke Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, wrote the bulletin, kept office hours, that kind of stuff. And I remember one of the leaders of the church in Salem, Arkansas, telling me, "Hey, you're doing a good job, and we really think the world of you, and we really love Jackie, but the house you live in belongs to the church. And if something happens to you and you die, Jackie's going to need a place to live." That's when I realized that as well as they took care of me and as much as they liked me, I didn't live in a house my wife would live in if something happened to me. And I decided that the next time I had a ministry job, it would be a job with the arrangement that I'd buy my own house. I've been burned in ministry. There was a time when I would have said I was burned out. There are times when I've considered that I have been mistreated and misrepresented because of some of the things that I teach and the way I view scripture. I have been labeled persona non grata by schools of thought, and schools of preaching. I'm way too much for one group and not enough for the other group. If I'm way too much for this group, it's not enough for the other group. And if it's not enough for the other group, it's way too much for that group. I've never actually been fired. I was told one time that, hey, we're going to change your role and we're going to bring somebody in to do this particular job. And so you're going to be replaced as the youth minister. And that wasn't anything that I would have ever chosen to do, but it was chosen for me. I've experienced things where my integrity was called into question. People who were unhappy with choices I'd made decided rather than to disagree with me, they just would want my head or my job. There have been times when I was so unhappy in some of my ministry situations, I'd have taken a job field testing bulletproof vest. By and large, my ministry has been very fulfilling. It's been very rewarding. I have great friends and great experiences and have been allowed to raise a family and have a career in ministry. But in the worst times, in the times that it was the darkest and the dreariest and the most difficult in all those struggles, in all those disappointments, or even in my own personal failures, I've never once thought about calling the beer guy for a job. Now, I'm not saying that would be implicitly wrong for someone to work for the beer company. I'm not saying it's one of those things. I know lots of Christians who grew tobacco. I know of Christians who work in restaurants and they are waiters and waitresses and they serve booze. I'm just saying for me, I saw that as something that was kind of incompatible. I just couldn't see that. For me, I tried to explain some things about our choices to my daughter. I said, the guy who owns Chevrolet, his wife doesn't drive a Mustang. Okay. And so for me, I just didn't think that being a preacher and having a side gig at Anheuser-Busch was going to be the thing for me. It has a certain uneasy feel to it. Or at the same time, I didn't think working for Anheuser-Busch in the beer industry and having preaching as a side gig would be something for me. That was just a personal choice for me. And although that job was offered, and it was offered multiple times, it's something that I never, ever considered doing to solve any financial problem that I ever had. In life, there are some options. They're there, they're available, they're always on the table, but they just aren't options. There's some things that you can do, and you just choose not to do them. They're available, but you just consider this is something out of bounds, and I won't ever even consider it. Suicide should never be an option. Lying to solve a problem should never be an option. Lying to anybody for any reason probably should never be an option. When you lie, you create more lies and you create more problems. Gunnar and I were hunting the other day, and we got to talking about what lives in the woods, and bears and mountain lions and bobcats and coyotes, and then somehow we ended up talking about Bigfoot. And I saw something behind my fence one time when I was a little boy. He said, "Well, did you tell your dad?" And I said, "Well, yes, I told my dad." He said, "Well, did he believe you?" And I was able to say, as humbly as I could say, that as a little boy and as a teenager, I never lied to my dad. And because I never lied to my dad about my chores, I never lied to my dad about what I did do, I never lied to my dad about what I didn't do. When I told my dad I saw something that was unbelievable or incredible, my dad believed me. Because once you compromise the fact that you tell the truth or don't tell the truth, it's very difficult to retread that. So lying to get out of trouble, lying to solve a problem is one of those options you don't do. And along with that, you just don't treat people dishonestly. You don't steal from other people their ideas, their product, or their possessions. You choose not to be cruel to people even when you have the power to do so. Another thing that's never an option is you don't use other people's behavior as a license or an excuse for your own behavior. You never compromise the promises that you made to your spouse. Their behavior doesn't give you permission to quit trying. Their behavior doesn't give you permission not to do. Their behavior. Now, if they end the marriage, they end the marriage, but it's not going to be something that you initiate, with some minor exceptions, or I guess I should say some major exceptions. You don't consider an alternative to being married if you want to stay married. Now, if you're in one of those difficult situations and there's been infidelity or there's been abuse and you decide, hey, I'm going to protect myself from some toxic thing, yeah. But if you're in a marriage and you're just unhappy and you start considering an alternative to being married, you don't really want to stay married. Because once you start considering an alternative to being married, then you compare your spouse to your old flame, or you compare your spouse to your new friend, then you've started comparing fantasy to reality, and fantasy always wins. And that's just a place you don't allow yourself to go in your mind. There's lots of things that we could talk about, that there are things that you just don't do. There are things that you just don't consider. Even though you have a standing offer. Even though you can call in those options at any time, even though you have the business card, you have the number, and you have the contact to totally change your life, even when and even if it's the only offer you have, you just don't consider it. Because just because it's available doesn't mean it's acceptable. And maybe this is changing this topic, but I didn't pick up the beer guy because I needed a job. I picked him up because he needed a ride. And at that moment in time, that was actually my job. See, your importance in life is not about your car. It's not about your clothes. It's not about your salary. It's not about your position. The importance of the role you play in life is finding people who need what you have. When you find somebody who needs what you have, whether it's your time, your talents, or your attention, you find somebody who needs what you have and you either share it with them or give it to them. When that's your goal, you really become important to other people, and you already have a job. Using the tool of shortwave radio, World Christian Broadcasting literally covers the world every day with the gospel. They use 2 large curtain antennas. One is located in Anchor Point, Alaska, and the other in Madagascar. They send out messages that are recorded at their international home in Franklin, Tennessee. They make available 40 hours of broadcast every day. The broadcasts are made in English, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, Korean, English for Africa, and Arabic. They would love for your group to visit them. You can bring your ladies group, your youth group, or your men's group. Just give them a call at 615-371-8707, 615-371-8707, or you can go to worldchristian.org, find the Donate Here button, and make a financial contribution to support this work that literally covers the world every day with the gospel. World Christian Broadcasting, in cooperation with Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure, is sponsored by us. What? We sponsor ourselves? Is that even legal? Check us out on Amazon. You can have access to the titles of Pedagogue, the youth ministry book by Lonnie Jones, Cognitive Spiritual Development, a Christ-centered approach to spiritual self-esteem, Grappling with Life, Controlling Your Inside Space, a small essay using the principles of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to talk about psychological and emotional self-defense, If I Were a Mouse, a children's book written and illustrated by Lonnie Jones, and then The Selfish Reel, a very short story about a decision. Also, you can check out our YouTube channel to see archived lessons and presentations from across the country, some videos with rope tricks and knots. Don't forget to visit the Facebook page 550 Guys to learn about the little rope men that we make and that we invented and that we make. And then be sure to click like, subscribe, and share. This is Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure.